1795. Ireland. Thousands are dying of starvation. Children are eating grass and bark. Bodies line the roads. Just across the water, in England, a crop is growing that could save them all. Nutritious, easy to grow, incredibly productive. But most people refuse to touch it. Because for 200 years, Europeans have called it the devil's apple. A cursed food. Something evil. They believe it causes leprosy. That it's an aphrodisiac sent to corrupt the faithful. That eating it is a sin against God himself. And so they starve. By the millions. While the solution sits in the ground, forbidden. This is the story of how fear, superstition, and prejudice turned a miracle into a curse. The term devil's apple, or in Latin, malum diabolicum, appears in European texts as early as the 1590s. The reasoning was simple, medieval, and devastating. Potatoes grow underground, in darkness, hidden from God's light. In medieval Christian cosmology, everything had symbolic meaning. Up toward heaven was good, down toward hell was evil. Light was divine, darkness was demonic. Wheat reaches toward heaven, blessed by God's Son. Potatoes hide in the earth, in the realm of death and darkness. This wasn't just poetry. People genuinely believed that food grown in darkness carried spiritual corruption. And that word, apple, connected potatoes to the ultimate forbidden fruit. The apple from Eden, the food that damned humanity. So potatoes became doubly cursed, grown in hell's realm, named after Eden's sin. But the fear wasn't entirely irrational. Potatoes belonged to the Solanaceae family, the nightshades, and their family members included some of medieval Europe's most feared plants. Deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna. Even a few berries can kill an adult. Mandrake, used in poisons and witchcraft, shrieking roots of legend. Henbane, causes hallucinations, delirium, and death. Here's the tragedy, they were partially right. The potato plant is toxic. The leaves, stems, and flowers contain solanine, the same alkaloid in deadly nightshade. Early Europeans sometimes ate the leaves or fruits, small green tomato-like berries, got violently ill, and concluded the entire plant was poison. The irony? The underground tuber is perfectly safe, but nobody trusted it. And occasionally, they were right to be suspicious. Potatoes stored improperly turn green from solanine buildup. Eat enough green potato, and you will get sick. So there were documented cases of potato poisoning. Not because potatoes are inherently toxic, but because people didn't know which parts were safe. This created a vicious cycle. Fear led to improper handling, which caused illness, which confirmed the fears. Then came the religious arguments, and these were perhaps the most powerful barriers. Protestant ministers and Catholic priests alike raised a theological objection that seemed unanswerable. This was serious theology in the 1500s and 1600s. The Bible specifies which plants God gave to humanity for food. Potatoes aren't listed. Therefore, some argued, they must not be God's intended food. They came from the New World, a place unknown to biblical authors, outside God's original plan. Some extreme interpretations went further. If potatoes weren't in God's plan, perhaps they were part of Satan's plan. After all, they were called devil's apples. They came from darkness. They resembled the forbidden fruit that damned humanity. The counterargument, that God's creation includes many foods not specifically named in Scripture, was logical. But logic doesn't always win against fear and tradition. Interestingly, acceptance often fell along religious lines. Some Protestant regions adopted potatoes faster, while some Catholic areas resisted longer. But both had their opponents. Perhaps the most persistent and damaging myth: potatoes cause leprosy. The logic was medieval medicine at its worst. Potatoes are lumpy and knobby. Leper skin is lumpy and knobby. Therefore, eating potatoes causes leprosy. This was based on the doctrine of signatures, a medical theory that plants resembled what they could cure or cause. A plant that looked diseased would cause disease. And it wasn't just peasant superstition. Medical authorities endorsed this claim. In 1619, the city of Burgundy banned potato cultivation specifically because of fears they caused leprosy. Leprosy was devastating and terrifying. The fear was real, but the connection to potatoes was entirely imaginary. We now know leprosy is caused by bacteria, Mycobacterium leprae, spread person to person through prolonged contact. Potatoes have absolutely nothing to do with it. In fact, leprosy existed in Europe, Asia, and Africa long before potatoes arrived from the Americas. The timeline alone disproves the connection. But the myth persisted for generations, keeping a nutritious, vitamin C-rich food from people who desperately needed it. And then there was the scandal that might have been the strangest objection of all. Potatoes, many believed, were aphrodisiacs, foods that increased sexual desire. The belief was so widespread that Shakespeare referenced it. In The Merry Wives of Windsor, 1597, Falstaff exclaims, "Let the sky rain potatoes," in a sexually charged context. Why this belief? Potatoes came from the exotic New World along with tobacco and chocolate, both of which were also considered aphrodisiacs. Plus, their nightshade relative, mandrake, had ancient associations with fertility and sexuality. In conservative, religious 16th and 17th century Europe, this was a serious problem. Church authorities warned that potatoes would increase lust and lead to sin. Women especially were warned against eating potatoes. Some regions discouraged or even banned unmarried women from consuming them. The irony? Potatoes were simultaneously devil's food and food of lust. Evil food that corrupted the soul, but also stimulated earthly desires. Modern science finds zero aphrodisiac properties in potatoes. They're nutritious, filling, energy-providing, but they won't increase your libido any more than bread or rice. But this moral panic kept nutritious food from hungry people for generations. Beyond supernatural fears, there was another powerful barrier: class prejudice. In many regions, potatoes were initially fed to pigs and livestock. This created an association. Potatoes were animal food, beneath human dignity. And even among the poor, there was pride. If even pigs ate potatoes, what did it say about you if you ate them? European food culture had clear hierarchies. White wheat bread was the food of the wealthy, rye bread for the middle class, dark bread for the poor. Potatoes didn't fit anywhere on this ladder. They were off the chart entirely, in the realm of animal fodder. And Europeans had deep cultural connections to bread. Bread was civilization. Bread was culture. Bread was Christianity itself. Give us this day our daily bread. Potatoes were foreign. They weren't European. They came from conquered peoples in a conquered land. How could they replace the sacred bread that had sustained Europe for millennia? The French were especially resistant. France had the finest bread culture in Europe. Why would they debase themselves with underground tubers? For the wealthy, there was another concern: fashion and status. Eating potatoes might mark you as poor, unsophisticated, or desperate. Only in the most desperate times, war, famine, total crop failure, would people overcome these cultural barriers. So how did Europe finally overcome 2 centuries of fear? It took creative propaganda, clever psychology, and some colorful characters. Frederick the Great of Prussia forced potato cultivation, but also used reverse psychology. He guarded potato fields with soldiers by day, suggesting they were precious. By night, the guards disappeared. Peasants stole the potatoes, thinking they were taking something valuable. In France, Antoine-Augustin Parmentier hosted elaborate dinners where every course featured potatoes. Attendees included Benjamin Franklin and Lavoisier. He convinced Marie Antoinette to wear potato flowers in her hair, making them suddenly fashionable. Enlightenment thinkers published scientific papers about potato nutrition, countering superstition with data. But ultimately, war and famine forced the issue. During the devastating wars of the 17th and 18th centuries, armies destroyed grain crops. Potatoes, hidden underground, survived. When faced with starvation, people finally chose survival over superstition. By the 1800s, potatoes had finally become accepted across most of Europe. It took 200 years to overcome the fear. How many died because of these fears? We'll never know exactly. But European famines between 1550 and 1750 killed millions. In regions that adopted potatoes earlier, famine deaths decreased dramatically. In resistant areas, the dying continued. Today, potatoes are one of the world's most important crops. They feed over 1 billion people. They're grown on every continent except Antarctica. They went from devil's apples to daily bread, from forbidden food to staple crop. But it took 200 years of unnecessary suffering to get there. If this deep dive into dark history fascinated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where food, culture, and human nature collide. Check out my other potato history videos. This is part of a larger series on how one vegetable changed the world. Until next time, question your assumptions and eat your potatoes without fear.